Welcome to Catholic Conversations. This is your host, Adrian Fonseca. Praise be to God. It's good to be here today. And we're going to be talking about a number of topics. The headline topic that I want to talk about is about the Spanish Civil War. And I actually don't know all that much about the history of the Spanish Civil War. And I'd be very curious to learn more about it. This article was very fascinating to me. And I don't have a ton of insight about this because I just don't know that much about the history of the Spanish Civil War. I know a little bit and some of the major points, but if you know anything about the Spanish Civil War, let me know in the comment section down below in the live chat, and also recommend me any books on the topic or lectures on the topic. I'd be very curious. So thank you in advance for anyone who helps me with that. All right, let's see. Let me make sure I'm actually live this time. I know last time I didn't go live on YouTube, and I was like, oh, no one's joining. I wonder why. And it turns out I wasn't even live. And that's what happens when you start streaming at 10 p.m. Okay, it looks like we are, in fact, live everywhere. So let's begin. All right, the first story. This is a very interesting story out of LifeSite News. Exclusive DOJ withheld evidence that could have helped Catholic pro-lifer who died in federal custody. Again, you know what's interesting about LifeSite News' articles is that the way they use their editors just make interesting choices, in my opinion. For example, saying could have instead of could have is generally considered standard to not use conjunctions and headlines and things like that. I wonder why they decided to use could have instead of could have. I don't know. It's not here nor there, but it just caught my attention. It's not really relevant to the story. Okay. The U.S. Justice Department, DOJ, withheld exculpatory evidence from Mark Reno, a pro-life Catholic man charged with shooting at a federal building in Knoxville, Tennessee. Reno died in federal custody 28 days after his arrest for his alleged crime. On July 18, 2022, the FBI arrested Mark Reno at his home in Jefferson City, Tennessee, and charged him with destroying government property, claiming that he shot 3 windows of the John Duncan Federal Building on July 3, 2022. No bullets, fragments, or casings were ever found. Despite a due process order mandating that the prosecutor, the United States of America, turn over all exculpatory evidence, the prosecution never disclosed to Reno or the court a federal report dated June 18, 2022. This report, written by a security officer for the Duncan building, documented another broken window in the building. The officer thought that this window had been broken by road debris loosened by nearby construction. Reno's detention hearing for the alleged shooting on July 3rd was held on July 22nd. At this hearing, U.S. attorneys did not turn over the federal report about the window broken on June 18th, based on the evidence that was presented in the oral arguments. Judge Jill McCook decided that Reno should be detained until he could be tried. However, he never made it to trial. He died in federal custody August 15th. A few months later, the DOJ posthumously accused Reno of being the arsonist who set fire to Knoxville Planned Parenthood on December 31st, 2021. Okay, pause right there. I would like to know how he died in federal custody. They kind of are brushing over it as if it's not important. I imagine that I don't know, it's not relevant that they died of natural causes because it doesn't bring up any kind of abuse that was going on or something like that. It's very strange. You know, right off the bat, anyone who knows anything about pro-lifers are going to immediately be very suspect of this story because pro-lifers are not known to be very violent people. They're very well known to be very peaceful people. It's very, very rare to find any situation where pro-lifers are doing violent acts. Now, that being said, it's not completely unheard of. It's not impossible that this happened. However, every time it does happen, it makes national news. Every single news coverage across the nation is going to cover a story that says pro-lifer did something wrong. Always happens. Always is that way. So the fact that this story happened is already very strange. So why on earth, what's the motive here? They shoot at a Planned Parenthood. Then what? You just broke a couple windows. You did no good. I guess maybe you're trying to scare people into doing something they weren't there to not go in because there might be shootings. It doesn't pass the sniff test. It just doesn't smell right. Something doesn't smell right in the story right off the bat. How the withheld report came to light. The report which the DOJ withheld was made by an officer of the Federal Protective Service. The FPS is a branch of the Department of Homeland Security charged with guarding federal properties. I obtained the FPS report and others by requesting under the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA. The withheld report documented an incident in which a window was shattered on the John Duncan building on June 18th. Skipping ahead. The officer reported, I did note the chipping of the curb and numerous small pieces of concrete on the street and sidewalk near the damaged window. The construction occurred across the street, could have also been involved in the cracked window, but no direct evidence provided me with insight into how the window was damaged. I reviewed video footage from 0910 hours to 10:40 hours on the June 18, 2022, and was unable to identify the cause of the broken window from the footage. The FPS did not classify the June 18th event as a shooting. Now, look at the pictures. To me, honestly, it's impossible to tell what's going on here. It doesn't quite look like a bullet, but it doesn't also look like it's not a bullet. It's a little too small to be a 9mm. It's a little too big to be a 22. I guess the bullet could have rolled on its side and entered in. That could be a 22 that way. Though usually a bullet doesn't tumble until after it pierces something, so it'd be very peculiar for it to do that. Yeah, this doesn't quite look like a bullet hole. It doesn't quite look right to be what we assume is the damage that's being caused. It's more likely this is probably nothing to do with a bullet at all. But I'm not a firearms expert. I know a little bit about guns, a little bit about bullets, and that's just my unprofessional opinion on the matter. People who know more, feel free to chime in. The DOJ was under a due process order. On the day of Reno's arrest, the prosecutor was given an explicit court order to turn over all exculpatory evidence. Pursuant to the Due Process Protection Act, yada yada yada. This doesn't actually matter. This is just them telling them to live it over. This order refers to the Supreme Court decision by Brady v. Maryland, which affirmed that it is a violation of due process for the prosecution in criminal proceedings to withhold evidence favorable to an accused, irrespective of the good faith or bad faith of the prosecution. The withheld report had exculpatory. I do not like that word. That word is just so difficult for me to say. Exculpatory. It just means, for anybody who doesn't know, it just means something that can exonerate someone that can free someone. Value for Mark due to qualities in common with the July 3rd, the damage of which he was accused. The fractured pattern was nearly identical for all the windows. This is just what we've been talking about. No one reported gunshots. So it listed all the things of basically showing how it's impossible for him to have done what he did. That there is no reason why anyone should believe that he did that. Patterns were also noted for both incidents. In her affidavit accusing Reno of the July 3rd shooting, FBI agent Jesse Mann described Reno's driving near the Duncan building. Vehicle 1 decreased its speed briefly in the vicinity of the first damaged window in the IRS office. Vehicle 1 next accelerated and then immediately slowed to a brief stop in the vicinity of a second and third damaged window in the lobby of the federal building. However, the author of the June 18th report indicated that nearby construction was causing disruption to drivers in general. Construction is being completed directly across Locust Street, and the street has been narrowed, causing multiple vehicles to run along or upon the curb. Okay, here's the other thing about this, and I think we're going to get into this as well. It doesn't really matter. If you want to read the document, then check it out and read the rest of the court's references and what was delivered, what wasn't delivered. I'm going to skip over to the end just because these details don't really matter for the commentary. It's interesting information. But here's the thing that's worthy of note. And that's the fact that the U.S. government seemingly, and there needs to be an investigation here, was this just gross negligence? Or was this a deliberate attack on pro-life Catholics, on pro-life Americans? Because it seems to me that this was deliberate. You don't hear about stories that are this egregious happening that often. But typically, when mistakes are made, they're typically made to the detriment of Christians, of pro-lifers. Isn't that coincidental how that happens, how that works out that way? It may not be so coincidental in my opinion. I don't know what you think. Here's the last paragraph, or the last section. The DOJ posthumously accused Mark Reno of the Planned Parenthood arson. Mark Reno is better known in Knoxville as a man the DOJ accused of burning down Knoxville Planned Parenthood. The DOJ made its accusation on November 1st, 2022, a little more than 2 months after Reno's death. However, the Knoxville Fire Department later released Planned Parenthood security footage showing the real arsonist, a man much thinner and more agile than Reno. In its final report, the Knoxville Fire Department also concluded the fire was started from inside the building, that the arsonist likely climbed through the narrow, unsecured windows of the new addition. The author is grateful for Mrs. Taylor Williams for her assistance with this article. Okay, so this is very concerning, especially considering the fact that this story seemingly there was people out to get this man. Why? Why are they out to get Mark Reno? Who is Mark Reno? I would love to know more about this fellow because it really does seem like he is being accused of something. Here's let me see if I can pull this up for you. Here's the original article. Here's a timeline of what happened. Let's see if I can open this up. Here we go. So in 2021, there was a Planned Parenthood arson. Mark Reno was approached by undercover arson investigators at Knoxville March for Life about a month later. In April, so that was in January. In April, the FBI surreptitious, I cannot say that word. I'm not even going to try. Recorded Reno at a second pro-life event. Okay, so now we know that the FBI is spying on Mark Reno for some reason. 2 months later, in June, the window was broken at the Duncan building, probably by an accidental projectile. On July 3rd, more windows were broken on the Duncan building. About 15 days later, Reno was arrested, charged with shooting at the Duncan building on the 3rd. Judge Jill McCook ordered Reno detained till trial. The grand jury then indicted him 4 days later, and then less than a month later, he dies in federal custody. And then not until November of that same year, the Justice Department accused him posthumously of being the arson at the Planned Parenthood. So what's exactly going on here? This timeline is very strange. There is an arson that happens. A year later, he's accused of it after he died. How did he die? Why was this man such a target for the FBI? It's a very strange situation. I would love to learn more about it. I don't actually have any theories because I don't even know who the guy is. I don't know who Mark Reno is. The article really doesn't say anything about his life and his story, nor does it talk about how he died. If anybody has any additional information about his life, who this man is, please let me know, because I would love to know what the deal is here. This whole story just smells to, I don't even know, smells like sulfur. All right, let's move on. We're definitely going to keep an eye on that story, and if it ever has additional information come up about it, we will follow up. Okay, so here's another story that's very concerning. And I already hate flying. I don't like flying. It freaks me out, personally. I will fly when I have to. And if I can help it, I will make the drive when necessary. But if I'm unable to, if it's too far away to drive, I will fly. And even with everything going on, I'm still comfortable flying if I have to. But this makes me more and more concerned about getting in the air. Denver air traffic goes dark, leaving nearly 20 planes stranded mid-air in latest scare. That headline immediately fills me with dread. Like, how on earth? Like, it's one thing when we hear about incompetence, human error. It's another thing when we hear about failure in mechanical errors. Like the plane having some kind of mechanical failure, which is it can be human error depending on the mechanics, things like that. But I'm separating that as a category from the pilot error. And then now we have to worry about air traffic control as well. Dozens of commercial aircrafts were left virtually flying blind after a Monday outage at Denver Airport's air traffic control left pilots unable to communicate with controllers for 90 seconds. You know how long 90 seconds is? If I stood here and I just said nothing and you just watched me say nothing for 90 seconds, it'd feel like an eternity. Did you know if you traveled about, and this is off the top of my head, so it's going to be slightly off. If you traveled 60 miles an hour, in 10 seconds, you would have traveled roughly 3 football fields. Someone fact check me on that. Make sure my math is correct. An airplane flies much faster than 60 miles per hour. Now, granted, if they are landing, they're probably not hundreds of miles an hour at that point. However, flying, let's just say they're going, I don't know, as fast as a fast vehicle on the highway, 80 miles an hour. In 90 seconds, they could have traveled, what is that? 100 football fields? Something like that? They could have traveled very, very far in 90 seconds. That is a very long time to be without knowing what's going on. Now, obviously, they had their eyes. They could still see through the window. But modern airplanes and modern pilots are trained to use the instruments they're given primarily. Now, of course, they are trained as well on how to use things if the devices go down, but they're not experts on that. That's not what they do on a daily basis. This isn't 50 years ago when every pilot was flying normally without instruments. It's a very different world. And we're moving more and more to rely more and more on technology. This makes me very concerned about the technocracy that we're building. This whole situation where we want to rely more and more, have robots in our homes, put robots running our factories, have everything be automated, everything run by AI. What happens when we lose power? What happens when something goes down, something stops working? Are we going to have people who know how to fix it, who know how to do the jobs that they don't do anymore, rather? Are we going to have... Our infrastructure is so fragile. At any moment, our infrastructure can just collapse on us. We're going to continue. The incident occurred Monday afternoon at the Denver Air Route Traffic Control Center in Longmont, which oversees aircraft movement across 9 states. Between 15 and 20 commercial aircrafts approaching Denver International Airport lost all communication with controllers when multiple radio transmitters failed. Multiple radio transmitters failed. How does multiple radio transmitters fail? That means their primary one broke. Oh, our backup broke. Oh, don't worry, we got a backup to the backup. Oh, that one broke too. What is that? It's flabbergasting, this whole situation. While initial reports indicated an outage of up to 6 minutes, the FAA has since clarified that the outage was approximately 90 seconds, that it is investigating the cause. Right, okay. Tell me, what do you believe? 90 seconds or 6 minutes? You think that they're telling the truth, that they actually only were out for 90 seconds? Or do you think it was actually maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 minutes? What do you think? According to ABC7, controllers were already operating on a backup 5th frequency. Please tell me that 5th frequency doesn't mean the 5th version and 5th means something else. Because to me, it sounds like they're saying this is the 5th backup. Oh no, it is. It is. If I read further, on a backup 5th frequency when the system crashed as 4 of the other frequencies had already crashed. That's absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. When the final frequency went down, a controller eventually reached one pilot using a seldom used distress channel, who then relayed instructions to other aircraft. Let me reread that. Let me just reread that. This is the most mind-boggling situation. Imagine being on that flight. I don't know if anybody who was on the flight knew what was going on. According to ABC7, controllers were already operating on a backup 5th frequency when the system crashed, as 4 of the other frequencies had already crashed. When the final frequency went down, a controller eventually reached one pilot using a seldom used distress channel, who then relayed instructions to other aircraft. This is what I'm talking about. How many of the pilots theoretically they know about this seldom used distress channel, but they never have used it before in real life. They've never had to. Maybe they've tested it a couple times, but they've never actually used it. Are they going to be able to operate all these things? And luckily in this situation, everything was fine. What about a different situation where everything may not be fine? David Riley, a retired air traffic controller with 32 years of experience, said this incident was a sign that the FAA's equipment was, quote, getting old and is no longer a risk that should be tolerated. Yeah, you know what's funny about that? I was talking to a friend of mine who has a lot of experience in our electric grid infrastructure. And he was telling me how the situation with our electric grid is pretty delicate. That it could very easily go down on its own because it's just not updated. It's purely maintenance. And so they wait for things to break and then they fix them. And that's when you'll get something new being implemented. And that's generally the case across the board. That's very concerning. For our infrastructure, like our planes, like our electric grid, our public transit, these things are high priority. I'm pretty small government in my beliefs. But one of the things that the government should be doing is national security. And the safety of our people through our infrastructure, like electrical grid, like planes, like public transit, our roads. These are things that the government should, in fact, be working on. This is part of their purview. The biggest risk is you have airplanes that you're not talking to. And then, therefore, the pilots have to try to figure it out themselves, Riley said. They still had radar coverage, and that's like watching a car crash happen and not be able to do anything about it. It's not acceptable. And the biggest problem is the fact that the FAA does not have stable funding to replace this equipment and maintain it in an appropriate fashion. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy recently acknowledged the outdated infrastructure problem. Quote, "We should be using fiber, but it's copper. We use radar from the 1970s. Some of them are from the 80s, but most of them are from the 70s. I like how he says some of it is from the 80s as if that's better. As if, oh, okay, some of it's from the 80s. That it's basically modern technology. It's basically new. Has our radar not gotten any better since the 80s? A genuine question. I have no clue. I don't know anything about radar technology. I assume that our radar technology has gotten better since the 80s. It would stand to reason, right? Everything has gotten better since the 80s. All of our technology. I presume that is the case. Duffy said, quote, "So this technology is 50 years old that our controllers use to scan the skies and keep airplanes separated from one another." Well, we did a good job building things in the 70s and 80s apparently, because the fact that it's lasted this long and we've had like until recently almost no problems in the air shows how amazing our engineers were in the 70s and 80s. That's very kudos to you, to the, what is that, the boomers? Is that the boomers? Praise be to God. You guys rock. The Transportation Department now plans to ask Congress for billions to overhaul the system, including replacing 618 radars and upgrading all FAA computers that controllers use. Please don't tell me they're like on like Windows 6 or something. That's ridiculous. The FAA has experienced severe staffing shortages, with Newark Liberty International Airport recently operating with just 3 controllers when 14 were needed. Oh my goodness. Maybe I should apply and do that for a job. Apparently they need them. In a statement to Fox Business on Thursday, the FAA admitted that the Denver outage was partially due to how the antiquated air traffic control system is affecting our workforce. The incident comes amid growing concerns about air safety following severe high-profile aviation accidents and near misses across the United States in recent months. Okay. I have no solutions for this other than what Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy had to say. Yeah, we just need to spend the money. I mean, I hate to say it, but if it's going to cost billions, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't need to cost that much. Maybe it does. I have no clue. I don't know how much radars cost. But this is definitely a real problem that we have. All right, let me check the comments and see what's up. If there's any questions, comments, or concerns, soapboxes, negativities, positivities, or anything in between. Nothing on Rumble, nothing on X. On YouTube, we have a few comments. Let's see. Think of something cooler. Says, "I don't know how I found your channel, but you cover interesting stories, so I'm glad I'm here." Well, praise be to God. Welcome to the team. You're welcome to stay with us. He says, "Agreed. People think a minute and a half sounds like not a long time, but imagine watching a short or a video, we'll say, a skit with nothing for the entire time while traveling at high speed." Yeah, it's crazy. It's kind of like, yeah, imagine if you're driving down the road and you pull out your phone and you look at your phone for 90 seconds and you're like driving. That's an eternity. Imagine how far imagine where you would have crashed. It's crazy. He says, "This is odd that multiple transmitters failed. I worked in radio for years and the main transmitter never went down, let alone the backup, but they weren't connected to any digital system. I don't believe there's anything wrong with the old towers. They never go down. The problem isn't the hardware, it's the outdated software. And things in the 70s, last modern things do not work at all." It is kind of interesting, right? It's almost it's almost better to keep the stuff that's old and then just update the software system, because the old stuff seemed to work and our new stuff seems to not work as much for whatever reason. I don't understand it. I don't get it. It's very weird, but c'est la vie, I guess. He said, "It's most definitely outdated software. I'm sure that's true. It looks like Duffy wants to rewire everything. That's going to cost a lot and possibly give big contracts to telecom." Yeah, well, there you go. I'm not into giving investing advice, but I guess if you're into telecommunication services, maybe invest in that coming up because they're about to receive billions of dollars because this can't go on any further. Let's see. The Big Watermelon sent a super chat. I wonder, how do people show their super chats on their screen? I have no idea how to do that. Um, I am a terrible streamer because I have no clue how to show comments on the screen. I don't know if people use something else to do things like that, but nonetheless, he says, "Is DEI Catholic?" Is DEI Catholic? By DEI, do you mean Dei? Is God Catholic? Yes, of course God is Catholic. But of course, obviously, we mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity, it's a funny word, equity. Equity refers to equality, but mankind is not equal. We're radically unequal. The only way in which man is equal is in our dignity before God. We are equal to God in our nature, in the sense that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. However, that's the only way in which we are equal to God, equal to each other. In every other way, we are radically unequal. Some people are great athletes. Some people are stronger. Some people are faster. Some people are shorter. Some people are taller. Some people are better looking. Some people have various skills that other people don't have. Everyone is unequal. So this idea that we must have equity, and we have to have diversity, and have to have inclusion in every aspect of life, I don't know if this has anything to do with the current issue that we're talking about in regards to the plane crashes, or the issue with the communications in the planes. Probably not. It probably has nothing to do with DEI in this particular case. The pilot issue probably does have something to do with DEI. That's very, very common. We should be hiring people in a meritocracy type way. The best person for the job gets the job for most jobs. I think there are exceptions to that. There are some situations where you may not necessarily want the most qualified person. For example, if I was to become the king of Texas, as you might see in some, actually I think I took it off for everything. My old handle on Twitter used to be King Adrian as a joke. But if I became king of Texas and I needed to appoint people to serve underneath me and to work with me, I would almost certainly choose people who I trust over someone who is more qualified. And so in that circumstance, I would say making a meritocracy is not 100% of the case always the right answer. But if I'm going to be hiring somebody to do, I don't know, mechanical work, well then yes, I'm going to want to have the best person for the job. The person who's most qualified, has the most experience. If I'm going to hire a pilot, I'm going to find the person most qualified, most experienced. So for most jobs, I would say, yes, for certain, we want a meritocracy. For other jobs, we still don't want to just pick whoever just because they're diverse, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a meritocracy per se. It's absurd. The whole situation is absurd, and it's not. Of course, it's not a Catholic idea. It has never been a Catholic idea to have radical equality, make everybody equal. It's anti-Catholic, honestly. The church is unequal. We are a hierarchical organization. We have the Pope, the bishops, the priest. We have lay people who hold different positions. We have the Holy Roman Empire. In heaven, we have the choirs of angels, the Queen of heaven and earth. It's definitely not a Catholic idea. All right, let's move on to this story. The View's hosts are pretty sure that white South Africans... This story cracks me up. I saw the headline, and I was like, I had to talk about this because The View is just... I don't even know. Who watches The View? Does anybody watch The View? I've never been in a conversation with someone, and they were like, I was watching The View last night, and this is what came up, and I was really interested, and they made a really insightful claim, and I really learned something from them. I've only ever seen The View in clips from other people posting it. Especially on X, people will post clips of The View. Do you know a single person? I'd be very curious in the comments. Do you know anyone who watches The View or talks about it? Let's see. The host of ABC's The View joined a number of other media personalities in claiming that President Donald Trump was only allowing 59 Afrikaners, is that really the correct terminology? Afrikaners? Only allowing 59 Afrikaners to claim refugee status because they are white, while also claiming that because the Afrikaners are white, they are not truly refugees. You know, maybe I should start watching The View, to be honest, because they just say the quiet part out loud. We've been saying for years, the people in the traditional movement and the conservative movement, that it's not about helping poor people. It's not about helping people in need. It's about, well, I guess DEI. It's about it's a hatred for white people and a love for people who can disrupt our country. And I don't even want to say for colored people, because I don't even know what that means, first of all. What do we mean by colored people? Is white not a color? Also, are Italians white? Are Sicilians white? Are Irish people white? So I don't even know what they mean, what that even means. But they also don't want people who are going to further our movement. For example, Cubans. The leftists hate Cubans for some reason. Why do you think that is? Because they tend to be anti-communist. Very interesting, right? So it has nothing to do with helping people in need. Nothing to do with it. Because the Cubans were literally being killed in their own country. They are the perfect example of someone who needs to be seen as a refugee. The Afrikaners, the white people who came over, the South Africaners, are literally persecuted to death in their own country. And yet they said they're not true refugees. Why? Why are they not truly refugees? Because they're white. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? Sonny Hostin, I don't know, addressed the issue during Thursday's broadcast, complaining that the Trump administration had limited refugee status for Afghans and Haitians to whom she referred to as truly refugees. Hostin also took a swing at Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, saying she found it to be an insult that the former South Dakota governor held that position. All right, let me know. Should I play this clip, or would we all lose our minds if I play this clip? My eardrums start bleeding. Is that going to happen? I'll play it, and we'll see if we survive.
For me, you know, I think one thing, having Kristi Noem be in charge of Homeland Security in and of itself is an insult. It's just an insult. And I think something that we're not talking about is enough about is what Donald Trump did on Monday, is that the Trump administration allowed in 59 white South African refugees into this country, claiming that they were fleeing racial discrimination and land appropriation. So the South African president has been actively, denying that persecution. He says a refugee is someone who has to leave their country out of fear of political persecution, religious persecution, or economic persecution. They don't fit that bill. And so the fact that Afghan refugees, people who helped us during the Afghanistan war, helped us and protected our troops, that program has been dismissed. The fact that Haitians that are truly refugees.
All right. I'm going to pause here. Okay. I can't let's do it anymore. So she's saying, okay, yes, the South Africaners, and she defines what a refugee is and says this is not what the South Africaners are. Except they are. It said, the president of South Africa said that that's not true. And so now we just, whatever the leader of that country says, then we just take it for truth. So if we lived during World War II era, the post-World War II era rather, and we hear some Chinese people need help and they need to come to the U.S. for assistance. But Mao Zedong comes in and is like, no, everything is peaceful here. Nobody's being killed. Everything is fine. We'd be like, oh, okay, well, we're going to send these Chinese people back to China then. All right, bye. Is that what her thought process is? That if the head of state for that country says that nothing's happening, then we just take it for a word? I wonder if she'd apply that to Donald Trump. She says, for me, I think one thing, having Kristi Noem be in charge of Homeland Security in and of itself is an insult. It's just an insult. I remember they were making gurring sounds and animal sounds. What is wrong with these people? They have no... It's absurd. Is it an insult? Huston began, and I think something that we're not talking about enough about is what Donald Trump did on Monday. The Trump administration allowed in 59 white South African refugees into this country, claiming that they were fleeing racial discrimination and land appropriation. Bingo. So this is the thing. They are unable to conceive of an idea where there is racial discrimination against someone who looks lighter complected. Because they have this strange idea that racism can only apply to people who have darker skin color. It's an absurdity. And it's racist. You can, in fact, be racist against white people. If you hate white people because of their skin color, you are a racist. I hate to tell you. Actually, I'd love to tell you. And it seems as though they refuse to believe that white people could ever be persecuted. Hostin went on to claim that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has disputed reports of land appropriation and racially motivated discrimination, despite the fact that Ramaphosa himself signed a bill into law in late January that allowed the government to expropriate private property for reasons up to and including, quote, to promote inclusivity and access to natural resources. The Afrikaners, according to Hostin, did not qualify as refugees. Instead, she referenced refugees from Afghanistan and falsely claimed the program in place to grant protected status to Afghans who helped us during the war has been ended. In fact, the suspended Afghan temporary protected status program is entirely separate from the more permanent special immigrant visa program exclusively for Afghans who were allies during the war. Yeah, so I don't know anything about that. And it is an interesting situation. I guess, generally speaking, we need to assist those who have helped us during the Afghan war, especially those who their lives are in danger for helping us. Okay, and 100% we should help those people. I don't know if we should extend that universally to everyone who's helped us, because that would be a long list of people. But certainly the ones who helped us in a very explicit way that they would be killed for, well, certainly those people should be seen as refugees. I'd probably be willing to say that all of them could be allowed, but not to become citizens, to have status here, protective status here, meaning they'd go back to their country, assuming things would calm down. Anyway, we'll continue. And so the fact that the Afghan refugees, people who helped us during the Afghanistan war, who helped us and protected our troops, that program has been dismissed. The fact that Haitians that are truly refugees, they have been denied protected status. They're not white people. That's why they don't want them here, co-host Joy Behar suggested. She said it. I didn't. Hostin agreed. Okay. That gives me a headache listening to these racist. I don't like racist. Okay, let's see. The Think of Something Cooler says, no, I don't think anyone watches it, but the post coverage is a new SNL. Honestly, you can either laugh at it or you can just like bang your head into a wall repeatedly. Those are your two options, right? A Simple Crusader says, finally a show I can watch live. Almost no one I watch streams at this time. Yeah, I kind of stream whenever I can. I have a weird schedule. I go to a boxing gym after work, and sometimes I'll stream before going to the gym. Sometimes I'll stream after I go to the gym. Today it's after. It just kind of depends on the situation. So I've only started the show up again for about a week. So eventually I'll probably solidify a particular time and place of when I'm going to do it. And if more people join at this time rather than another time, then I'll consistently do it at this time. That's just the way it's going to be. The Big Watermelon says, did you see the story that Pope Leo is the first black pope? Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. He might be. I don't know. I'm pretty sure we've had a African pope before. I don't know if he was black, but we had an African pope before. I don't know if he was what his skin color was. Also, I don't know if we can. I guess he was. The things I've seen is that they're saying he was Creole, which is part black. Which, okay, cool, whatever. I really don't care what his skin color is or what his ethnicity is. I guess it matters a little bit in the sense that honestly, it doesn't matter at all, to be honest. I can't think of a reason why his race would matter all that much. I guess it affects his temperament, his upbringing, things like that. But not really. It doesn't really bother me. I mean, if we were all making jokes about who we wanted as president, and personally I was saying I wanted Cardinal Arinze, who is much too old to be elected. He's very, very old, but he would have been the best. And I think he's still alive. He's very old. Anyway, let's see. Think of Something Cooler said, just watched great coverage on this today. According to an expert, there are at 6 on the genocide scale out of 8. Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, South Africa has been well known for years to have this persecution against. I remember a story that came out, was it 2 years ago, where the Biden administration sent back South Africans who were in danger of their lives because they said that they were not really refugees and they didn't want them here anymore. A craziness. And nobody really cared. Nobody talked about it back then. OG Zombie Mutt Dog Retired says, it's just another Trump publicity stunt. He's pandering to his base to distract them. Yeah, maybe. Maybe he is. Maybe, here's the other thing. People have this strange idea that if someone is pandering to you, therefore it's bad. I don't think that way. I think I will take the victories where I can get them, and whatever someone does, their own intentions, whatever their intentions might be, well, that's on them. That's between them and God. I care more about the actions themselves. Are the actions themselves something that is justified, right? So, is bringing those people over a good thing? Yes, it is. What are his intentions? Maybe it's to pander to people. Okay, and? It's kind of like whenever people, Donald Trump was posting pictures of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Our Lady Guadalupe, and it was on her feast day and said, Happy Birthday to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And people were like, he's just doing this to pander to the Catholics. I'm like, okay. I'm happy for him to pander to me. Praise be to God. That's great. If he panders to me more, I'd be even more grateful. Pander to me all you want. And then he tweeted out the St. Michael prayer. And people were like, see, he's just doing this to get the Catholic vote. Okay. So if he decides, and he has no intention of actually doing anything good ever, but he has this idea, I need the Catholic vote, so I'm going to start implementing pro-life principles. But secretly, in my heart of hearts, I hate babies and I want them all to die. Okay, that's between you and God, man. That's between you and God, and you're going to have to answer for that when you die. But if your policies are pro-life, even though you don't believe in pro-life policies, okay, so be it. So be it. I would love for you to convert, and I will pray for your conversion, but so be it. Think of Something Cooler said, they didn't just apply for refugee status in the U.S., they sought it in the EU and Canada. A former anti-apartheid activist testified at the UN that they are 6 out of 8 on the genocide scale. I don't understand anyone who doesn't call it genocide. There are Christians being massacred all over Africa, black or white. They should have priority for refugee status. Haiti is different. There is no killing based on religion or ethnicity. Yes, I do. I'll post in the comments after the live. I have to look up exact names. Referring to a different comment. He said, do you have a reference for your allegations? Okay. The Big Watermelon says, did you see the Episcopal Church cut ties with the government refugee settlement program after this? They said helping Afrikaners over other refugees is unfathomable. Yeah, so that's the other thing. That's absurd to me. That's absurd to me. I did see that story. And I thought about talking about it, but I don't really care that much about the Episcopal Church. They said they're not going to help anymore because the people that the government's bringing over are not people that they want to help. Is that very Christian? Like the South Africaners who are coming over here have nothing to do with this. They have nothing to do with the situation. They're not over here politically maneuvering to try to get help and not get help or anything like that. They were invited to save their lives by coming to the United States, and they accepted the invitation to come. And they fled here, and now they're seeking assistance. And the Episcopal Church says, because this is not the refugees that we want, we're not helping you. That is mind-blowing. That is awful. That's an awful thing to do. Let's see. He says, I didn't think of something. He said, okay, let's go. OG Zombie says, I'd like to see those genocide statistics. Send them back. Yeah, there's nothing. The problem isn't sending people back. It's who you're sending back and why are you sending them back. Refugees who are facing genocide should not be sent back to their countries. People who come here illegally because they want a financial future, but are not being persecuted in their own country, it's just not ideal for them. Though they can be sent back. There's no problem there. More than happy to send them back to their countries. Think of something cooler said, I don't know if it's pandering because it's not popular. The media is easily twisting it. I think it was brought to his attention by Elon and decided it was time. Not just Canada helped. OG Zombie, they are readily available. I don't understand why you don't just look them up. Statistics are not a secret. Yep. 100%. And I think you're right. I have no desire to comment on the intentions behind particularly this kind of things like this. We can speculate, and I'm happy to speculate and say, okay, it seems like this, seems like that, based off of his experience, based off this, based off that. And sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not. Like, personally, I don't think the whole Catholic thing was pandering, because he did it multiple times, and it really didn't seem to be assisting him in his election, because the evangelicals don't like Our Lady, and so posting images of Our Lady is actually going to hurt him. He could pander to Catholics in other ways that would be less divisive. So personally, I don't think that that's the case. But just for the sake of argument, I'm happy to say, like, look, it doesn't really matter, the pandering one way or the other. Okay, let's move on. Okay, this was the headline story, and this is kind of the story I wanted to talk about. And I'm very curious if anybody knows more about the Spanish Civil War than I do. I know very little. I've read very little. I've read no books on the topic. I've read some articles on the topic. And just through conversations, I've learned about the Spanish Civil War. If anybody has references, books, or lectures on the topic, I'd be very curious to learn more about it. Okay, but let's read the story. I find this very fascinating. Almost 85 years after General Francisco Franco led the nationalists to victory, the Spanish Civil War is the kind of conflict that just refuses to die, and continues to motivate social discussion and strife across Spain. Few symbols express this more deeply than the Valle de los Caídos, or Valley of the Fallen, which is once more at the center of a dispute involving the ideological heirs of both sides of the war: the government of Spain, the Archdiocese of Madrid, the Vatican, and even the Benedictines. Now, before we go on any further than this, I think it's important to also remember that the Spanish Civil War, and this is why I'm very curious for people who know more than this than I do, is it was a very complicated war. It was not like other wars that we see where it's a clear-cut sign. I guess most wars are more complicated than we make them out to be. Most wars are not black and white. But here in particular, we know the Republicans were very anti-Catholic, and they were killing Catholics left and right, digging up graves and putting their bones on display. And then there were different movements against the Republicans. You had the fascist, you had the Carlist, and I think there was one other group as well who were also involved. So there was 3 different groups, if I'm not mistaken, who were fighting against the Republicans. The Carlists were anti-fascist, but they worked with the fascist. They worked with Franco to fight against the Republicans. And the Francoist, we'll distinguish them, we'll say the Francoist, were not like the fascist in Germany. They're very distinct. Franco very explicitly said that he wanted to restore the monarchy to the church. But then, of course, after he had victory, he didn't quite do that until after his death. So it is a more complicated war than we see in most other places. It's not clear cut what's going on here. And people also like to say the Carlists supported Franco. And from my understanding, I've spoken with a few Carlists, and they said that no, they worked with them on some occasions, and some of them were inscripted into battle for them. But the Carlists as a movement were always anti-Francoist. It gets complicated. And I find this very fascinating. So let's continue. The monument of the Valley of the Fallen, or Valley of Cuelgamoros, I'm probably mispronouncing that, as it was officially renamed a few years ago, was meant to be a symbol of reconciliation, built in the wake of a horrific conflict which tore Spain apart. Instead, it became a perennial flashpoint between the political left and right, and the subject of tense negotiations between the government, who want to re-signify the site, and church authorities responsible for its basilica. Anytime you see the words re-signify, anything like that, I'm immediately skeptical, because there's always a movement to redefine monuments, to tear down monuments, these ideas that we see this all the time in America. Things don't play out the same way in other countries, which is why I'm very hesitant usually to talk about international affairs, or I'm very agnostic when it comes to international affairs generally. Obviously, some things are black and white, some things are a little more complicated, but there's not necessarily the same mentality as Americans. And I understand American mentality, but I don't quite understand mentality in other countries. The monument is deeply Catholic and includes a 152 meter, which is 500 foot, vertical cross, a cross-shaped basilica, and a Benedictine monastery. Over 30,000 people are buried there, 1/3 of whom fought for the Republicans. But for many who sympathize with the losing side of the war, the whole complex reeks of fascism and stands as a testimony to a period and an event they wish had never happened and would like to erase from their history books. Now, while I'm not a fascist, and I'm not going to defend the fascist, I do think it's a bad idea to erase these ideas or these monuments. I am a little bit more sympathetic to the Francoist more than I am to the fascists in general, as the situation was very fraught at the time. After more than a decade of discussion, the Catholic Church and the socialist-led government in Spain announced earlier this year that they had reached an agreement which would keep the basilica, its massive cross, and the Benedictines in place, with the government moving forward with plans to re-signify the secular parts of the monument. Now, this is the part that I don't like, because immediately, what do you think they're going to re-signify it to? Is Spain Catholic Spain now? Is Spain now run by the Bourbons, or by whatever, any of the Catholic kings? No, of course not. So what do you think is going to be the symbols that they replace it with? Probably something socialist, probably something ugly, probably something brutalist. It goes on and says, and both sides have been criticized by their own supporters for selling out to the enemy. The more radical left wanted the valley cleansed of any Christian symbolism. These are the people that we're going to compromise with. We're going to compromise with people who want to cleanse of any Christian symbol. What does it even mean to cleanse something of Christian symbolism? What they mean to say is they want to desecrate it of any Christian symbolism. The more radical right consider any concession to the left as betrayal of those who won the war and a threat to religious freedom. This is written by The Pillar, and they're Catholics, and I generally like the reporting of The Pillar. However, to phrase it in this way, the more radical right, I don't know the details. Maybe it is like this. He's like, I don't even know. I don't know who is the radical right in Spain. I don't even know who that is. This is not a radical position to hold. It's not a radical position to say that we should not cleanse our church, our symbols, our Christian symbols from the public. It does seem like a betrayal to those who have won the war. What exactly the resignification entails is an open question. On April 14th, symbolically the anniversary of the 1931 proclamation of a Spanish Republic, the government launched an international tender for proposal that might reinterpret the site or give it a new meaning. The Spanish Bishops' Conference was quick to distance itself from the initiative, publishing a statement saying that the Catholic Church has never been the promoter or driving force behind the resignification activities that the Spanish government wishes to carry out in the Valley. So I'm glad the Catholic Church is standing up against that. Praise be to God. Are they doing anything else? Or are they just using words? Are they just saying, oh, we don't like this? I hope that they're actually going to stand up against this, maybe make a public demonstration, if possible. I don't know what the laws are in Spain in regards to that kind of thing. But they needs to have some force. The government is taking the initiative by launching a tender for proposal without consulting the church about the details or questions that should be clarified beforehand, in case the spaces and religious sensibilities are not respected. The terms of the agreement made between the government and the Holy See are general, and the details or particularities of the agreement have never been discussed, the bishop said. Once again, the government is taking initiative without resolving prior questions that affect the tender that they are presenting and that should be clarified beforehand. All right, we're almost done with the article, and I'll check the comments after I read the article, finish reading it. Gesture of reconciliation or monument to triumph. The Spanish Civil War lasted officially from 1936 to 1939, but those were just the 3 years of open conflict. Extrajudicial killings had started quite a while before that, with left-wing militants shooting political opponents and carrying out a persecution of the Catholic Church in Spain so severe it became known as the Red Terror. The uprising led by Franco in response, it was seen by many as a necessary response to the anarchy that had taken over large parts of the country. The war itself was brutal. Both sides murdered thousands of civilians. Foreign powers became involved, with the Nazis openly using Spain as a testing ground for their air force in support of the nationalists, and the Soviet Union providing support to the Republicans, and conning the government out of its massive gold reserves in the process. In the end, the nationalists, in reality a coalition of many groups from traditionalist monarchists to fascists and even regular Catholics who did not identify with the anti-clerical republic, defeated the Republicans, an equally diverse group of socialists, communists, and anarchists among others, setting the stage for Franco to rule as generalissimo for the decades until his death, after which he was succeeded by King Juan Carlos, the regent who oversaw a national transition to democracy. Yeah, I can't believe that. It's so absurd that he was given his kingdom back and he handed it over to democracy. It's absurd to me. Everything about the Valley of the Fallen is disputed in Spain. Franco supporters laud as visionary a monument dedicated to reconciliation, where fighters and victims from both factions are buried side by side, and where Benedictines are tasked with prayers for atonement, reconciliation, and peace. You know, I mean, that's a good thing to do. I mean, I can see why some people might not like that, but nobody's arguing over this right now. But just as a side, it's kind of like the Civil War in America, right? There was clear good guys and bad guys in the Civil War. And after the Civil War, there was a winning side and a losing side. And there needs to be reconciliation if we're going to force the Union to survive. If we're going to try to force it to survive, there needs to be peace. So we erect statues of even the enemy, of even the people who were bad, and we have to learn to forgive them. It may take a generation or two, but I like this idea too, where they're buried side by side, and then they had the Benedictines tasked with praying for atonement, reconciliation, and peace. That's a beautiful thing, because it's hard. It's hard when you have one side who is invading and slaughtering and killing, and you have another side who is resisting and is trying to promote and preserve traditional values. And then you end the war, and now you're going to have to reconcile because those are still your people in your country. They're still living there. They're still going to stay there. It's not like you're going to round them all up and execute every person who didn't support you. Now, the socialists might have done that, but that's a difficult thing to do. And I think it's a beautiful thing to incorporate the church in that way. But his opponents did not see a basilica as a gesture of reconciliation, but instead as a celebration of the regime and the victory of Catholic nationalism over anti-clerical republicanism. Well, so be it. If you're going to be upset about it, then cry about it. Left-wingers say the basilica was built by forced inmate labor, while right-wingers argue that only volunteer prisoners were used when they had 2 days struck off their sentence for each day they worked, besides being paid a proper wage. Okay, so now we're against having prisoners work. I never understood that whole thing. Even in America, some people are against prisoners working, but what do you want them to do? You would think they prefer to just sit in a cell for the rest of their lives, for the next 20 years, the next 30 years. If they work, a lot of times they'll receive shorter sentences. Sometimes they'll receive pay. Sometimes they'll receive certain kinds of goods, and they get to get out of their cell for a little bit and get some fresh air, get some sunlight. I think it's absurd, this whole narrative that you can't have prisoners work. I don't know where that comes from. Alvaro de la Peña, a Spanish Catholic lawyer who lives and works in the UK, worries that efforts to subvert the meaning of the monument today risk undoing the hard work put in by those of his grandparents' generation who managed to forge a new life in peace after the conflict. Franco conceived this as a symbol of reconciliation. The artist who designed and sculpted the giant statues, Juan de Avalos, was himself a socialist who was fully supportive of this monument, he told the Pillar. He is just one of many of my grandparents' generation who decided that the war could not be repeated and that reconciliation was the way forward. This generation gifted us with one of the most peaceful democratic transitions of history, where even Franco's parliament voted in favor of a democracy. I also lived this spirit at home, De La Peña recalled. My grandmother lost a brother in the war. He was a teenager, and his only crime was to be the son of his father, who worked in the army and was Catholic. I recently saw the leather bag where his remains were kept after his father found him buried and decapitated. Despite this, my family forgave the killers and hid people from both sides at home, including nuns and leftist workers. This was the cruel reality of the war, he said. My grandparents' generation wanted to live in peace, and the valley symbolizes this. Many families from both sides decided to bury their relatives next to each other as a symbol of reconciliation, under the cross of Christ, and many still want their relatives to remain there, despite the efforts from the government. Wow. I love Spain. Spain is like one of my favorite countries outside of the United States, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I just realized I wasn't sharing the screen, so I apologize for people who who weren't looking at that. I'm going to pause real quick, and I'm going to read the comments since this article is a little bit longer than I remember it being, so I don't want to leave y'all hanging for too long. So let me go over here real quick and see. Okay, let's see. In other news, Trump's Justice Department let a couple dozen Mexicans attached to a Guzman drug cartel into the country today. Yeah, I did not hear about that. If that's true, that's bad, and we should not let people in drug cartels into our country. Lucy says, "Hi, I'm way late." You're not late. You're right on time. A Simple Crusader says, "The phalangist, the Carlist, and monarchist and conservatives united together to fight the communists." There we go. Thank you. Think of Something Cooler said, "Hi, Lucy. Welcome. Nice to have more in the chat." OG Zombie says, "Sounds real interesting, but right now I'm more worried about the civil war brewing here in the USA." Well, you need to learn about what happened in other civil wars, because how are you supposed to resist that? How are you supposed to fight against it? Also, how are you supposed to learn how to reconcile after a civil war? Because I do think we are very close to a civil war here in the United States. I don't think that we're that far away from it, to be honest. I would not be surprised if that happens in our country. Think of Something Cooler said, "Interesting. ASCI know very little about this war." What is ASCI? I don't know what that means. Simple Crusader said, what helped the United Right was the division between the leftist factions. Poor Spain is stuck with Pedro Sanchez. Yeah, that's true. OG says, "Gotta go. We'll watch the rest later. Thanks for the hospitality." Well, praise be to God. I'm glad you came. Simple Crusader said, "Take care." Think of Something Cooler said, "I know about this. Erasing history sounds like a way to repeat it. Also sounds like what is happening in the UK movement to declare the Bible as hate speech." See you later, OG. Don't forget to check the comments. I'll post the expert's name for you. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. It says usually after a war is won in Western countries, the losing side gets to mourn and post some monuments and sometimes have a dedicated cemetery too. It's interesting the church is separating itself. I like the reconciliation concept too, and the Benedictine monks praying for peace too. Yeah, I know very little. I wish I knew more about the history of the Spanish Civil War, but the way in which they went about brokering peace just seems so. It's so Catholic. It's so beautiful. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they did after the war either, but this aspect I think is wonderful. And we should really keep that in mind because I know personally, yeah, if I was in that situation, I'd have a very difficult time of forgiving. And Christ has commanded us to forgive our enemies. So it's a good thing to learn. It's a good thing to meditate on because something like this may happen to us. Maybe in our personal life, if not in the scale of the nation. Hopefully not the scale of the nation. But nonetheless, it is something that is going to happen to us one way or the other. And it's a good lesson to hold. When he died, and against his own instructions, Franco was buried in the nave of the basilica near the remains of Primo de Rivera, leader of a nationalist faction who was executed by Republicans during the war. In fact, Franco was the only person buried in the valley who was not killed in the conflict. In 2007, Socialist Prime Minister Jose Luis Zapatero's PSOE's government introduced the Historical Memory Law, which was presented as a mechanism to provide justice to those who have been persecuted under Franco's dictatorship. Initial proposals included granting citizenship to foreign members of the international brigades who fought for the Republicans and the rejection of laws passed by the Francoist regime. But the legislation eventually evolved, leading to the removal of Franco's remains from the basilica in 2019 after a fierce legal battle. Primo de Rivera's family has meanwhile voluntarily removed his remains from the basilica to another resting place. Wow. That's like if we went through and we dug up the villains of the American Civil War, the War of the States, and dug up the villains of the story and said, we're not going to let them be buried where they've been buried since the Civil War, and we're going to just toss them over somewhere else. It's horrible. That's so diabolical. We should have some respect for the dead. Now, under Pedro Sanchez, the current socialist government has its sights on doing a makeover of the Valley of the Fallen, transforming it into what it claims will be a more neutral space, changing its overall symbolism. In hindsight, the decision to bury Franco in the Basilica turned the Valley of the Fallen into a place of pilgrimage for far-right, Sanchez has said. Alvaro de la Peña agreed that the decision was misguided, but says that this is not enough to explain the left's drive to change the monument and, quote, reframe the real narrative of reconciliation towards a narrative of hatred. None of the other 200 crosses destroyed or threatened by the government have Franco buried next to them, but they still targeted them, end quote. He said, referring to the other Christian symbols removed or destroyed because they were deemed to represent Francoism. Yeah, this is why the character of Franco is so distinct from that of other fascist rulers, namely Hitler, right, for example. Hitler was very paganistic, very anti-Catholic. Franco, for all his faults, clearly had a respect, at least, if not a love, for the Catholic faith, even though he was flawed. And so much so that they are associating Christian symbols with Franco. Like to have a cross, oh, you must be a Francoist. No, I'm Catholic. It's absurd. It's an absurd thing to accuse someone of. Javier Villamor is spokesman for the conservative activist group Haz Oír, Make Yourself Heard in Spain. He also thinks that the issue was never only about Franco. Of course not. Of course it's not about it. For the leftists, for the revolutionaries, the issue is never the issue. We have to remember that. The issue is never the issue. They always want to use a particular issue, and they recognize, okay, there's a sentiment against fascism nowadays. There's a sentiment against Francoism nowadays. So now, if we brand all of Christianity as Francoist, as fascist, we can now remove away these symbols and get rid of it. It's very clever but we have to catch them in their actions. And they do the same thing here in the United States. They want to associate anything good with anything bad that they can. Oh, you like crosses? Well, the KKK like crosses, so you must be like the KKK. They do this all the time. The most obvious example is they would make associations with Hitler and be like, oh, you like this? Hitler also liked this, so therefore you're Hitler. It's absurd. These are the things they do, though. The left has never wanted to admit either the defeat in the Civil War, or much less that their great enemy was buried there, he told The Pillar. Despite this, even if Franco had not been buried there, the monument would have been equally questioned by opposing ideological sectors due to its construction during the Franco era. Many Spaniards like Villamor believe that this ideological struggle is actually about something much deeper. In the opinion of many, the focus is no longer on the Civil War issue, but also on the cross and what it represents for the current enemies of Spain, he said. The valley is not only a cross or a basilica, but also a symbol of a Catholic Spain that refuses to die. Amen. Amen. Catholic Spain, the loyal son of the church. The Spanish left, led by the PSOE and more radical political forces, currently seeks to impose a partial and revisionist, I think that's supposed to say, maybe I'm not wrong, maybe I just don't know what that word means, vision of the past, according to Villamor. It instrumentalizes the valley as an ideological tool to perpetuate division and obtain symbolic victories that they could not achieve historically. This type of initiative does not contribute to reconciliation. On the contrary, it revives and deepens social fractures. And isn't that interesting as well? Clearly, this is not going to be something that is helpful for relations. And they do the same thing here in the United States. When they tear down statues of Christopher Columbus, let's just assume that he was this criminal that they make him out to be, which he's not. He was a very good man, should be well respected, and I believe maybe one day canonized. But let's just say he was bad. Does destroying his statues somehow undo the evil that he did? Does destroying his statues somehow create reconciliation with the people he represents, namely the Italians, even though he was sailed for Spain and the Italians didn't want him? That's not here nor there. The same thing is true here. Do you think that by destroying this symbol, that now all of a sudden everyone on the right is going to be like, you know what? I'm going to be friends with a socialist now. I'm going to reconcile with a socialist. All it's going to do is create greater division and greater animosity against the revolutionaries, which I think is a good thing. We should have greater animosity. But it seems contrary to your purposes. But could that be the plan? Many opponents of the current government believe it is. Pedro Sanchez is surrounded by judicial investigations. His wife is being investigated for several cases, his brothers too. As are some people from his inner circle, including a former minister and one of his former employees. In this context, he is trying to appeal to his voters by reopening Civil War wounds, said the London lawyer. The compromise decision on the future of the valley was reached after direct negotiations between the Spanish government and the Vatican. This is because the custody of the monument belongs, among others, to the Spanish state, the church, and private foundations, and church-state relations are subject to a concordant between the Holy See and the Kingdom of Spain. That's so epic. Pope Francis named his close ally, Cardinal Jose Cabo Cano, Archbishop of Madrid, as representative of the Vatican in these negotiations, with the government represented by Justice Minister Felix Bolanos. The final meeting took place in Rome in the presence of Secretary of State Cardinal Parolin shortly before Pope Francis died. During the 12 years of his pontificate, Pope Francis never visited Spain and is not known to have made any comments on the valley or its fate. But his successor, Pope Leo XIV, did visit the Valley of the Fallen in 2003 when he was Prior General of the Augustinians with the International Gathering of Augustinian Youth. Interesting. According to the agreement, the basilica will continue to serve as a place of worship, though reduced to only a small portion of the current building. The rest will be used for secular exhibits as part of the government's objective of re-signifying the site. The fact that we've let them win anything at all is just such an absurdity to me. It is just the peak of insult. I'm going to check the comments and then I'll come back to the story. Let's see. Let's see here. Usually after war is won, ASC is a simple it's a simple crusader. Yes. Ave says, can Catholics like Franco? He seemed pretty based. Yeah, I think it's a complicated situation. I know many Catholics who do like Franco, and I guess it depends on what you mean by like. I guess you can respect him. I'm not going to say anything on this topic because I just don't know enough. I don't know enough about the situation with Franco. I know as Catholics we can't be supporters of fascism because fascism is a national socialism. And which pope was it? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was said by one of the popes that a Catholic cannot accept even a moderate form of socialism. So even a national socialism is wrong. So I don't know enough. I've heard people say that the socialism of Franco was not quite the same thing as socialism elsewhere, and I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I am tempted to say that we should not be devotees to Franco. I think it's probably acceptable to have respect for him and to respect what he did, while criticizing some of the bad things he did. Yes, that's this thing. The Spanish Civil War was a complicated situation, and I just don't know enough about. Think of something cooler said. Interesting about these attempts to equate Christianity with fascism in the U.S. It has resulted in the number of people identifying as Christian going up for the first time in many years. 2 years in a row, up instead of down. So I think these attempts initially backfire. However, it might be successful in long game if legal precedent is set to remove all symbology and even graves, perhaps books too. Yeah, that's the other thing. They may be playing the long game, right? They're willing to take the L temporarily, knowing that in 50 years, people are going to forget because the monuments will be gone and people are going to stop telling their children about it. Maybe that's the play. The other thing is maybe they want to cause division. Maybe they want to incite violence. They want to incite people to react on their passions and do things that it may not be the most prudent thing to do. Jeff Burrier says, just joined the live feed about an hour in. This is off topic from your video, Adrian, but I attended a Catholic funeral today and the priest canonized it as the descendant of whom he had never met. Yeah, that's a very common thing. It's very bad. We should not canonize people who die unless they are very clearly saints. So obviously when Padre Pio died, we can canonize him on his funeral because he's a special case. But generally speaking, like if I died today, God forbid, I would not want anybody to canonize me. I'd want people to pray for me and say, let's hope that he is in purgatory. Let's hope that he made it to heaven. Let's hope he was saved. I think that's true. We can even apply it to this story. Same thing is true of Franco, right? I can't judge his soul. I don't know where he was and how he was when he died. And so therefore, I'm not going to judge whether or not he is in hell or in heaven. I have no idea. I have no clue. What you could say is like, he did good things, he did bad things. He had some sort of Catholic devotion in him. So let's hope and pray that he repented before he died and received the grace, final repentance. We could say something like that. RMP says, can Catholics approve of a communist revolution? Nope. Of course not. Of course not. Catholics cannot approve of a communist revolution. I'm not sure what that's a reference to, because the Republicans of the Spanish Civil War were communists. They were communist, and they were the enemies of the church. So I think it's important to note that. I don't know quite what you're referencing otherwise. So yeah, I'm not sure what you mean. If you're referring to Franco as in like him his revolution. Well, I don't think that you can consider what Franco did as a revolution necessarily, and I wouldn't try to. Yeah, I wouldn't categorize it that way. The Big Watermelon said, "What did Franco get wrong?" And like I said, I don't know. I know what I do know is that fascism is not a Catholic idea. And so, because of that, I would need to learn more about the history of Franco in particular, in order to be able to make a judgment on that topic. Let's see. Think of Something Cooler said, and maybe I will. We will revisit this story. I have some friends who are Carlist, and they very strongly don't like Franco. And I trust the Carlists. They're very good Catholics, very conservative, very traditional. They love the monarchy of the Spanish, and they would know better than I would on these topics. So maybe I'll invite one on and talk about that some more. Pope Pius XI further emphasized, this is Think of Something Cooler. Pope Pius XI further emphasized the fundamental opposition between communism and Christianity and made it clear that no Catholic could subscribe even to a moderate form of socialism. Yep, 100%. 100%. So we have to be, it's very clear. Catholic social teaching has been very clear from basically every pope. I remember I did a presentation on this. I think it's on my channel. You can go back and find it. And you can find the video I did on communism and socialism, and I basically just lay out all the quotes from the different popes, and the popes very clearly stated, all of them. The only one I couldn't find a quote from was Francis. He's the only one I couldn't find a quote anti-communism, anti-socialism, and it's very clear. They're very, very, and every single pope is speaking so clearly about communism, socialism, any form that's even like it. So that's very clear. Think of Something Cooler. Finished the quote. He said, "A kinder socialism. No one can be at the same time a good Catholic and a true socialist." End quote. Quadragesimo año. The Big Waterman says, "Are you Spanish? Last name sounds Portuguese." I have no clue. I will just say that I'm Spanish because I like Spaniards. We'll just go with that for now. Maybe another date we'll explore that. The two parts of the building will have separate entrances. The monks will remain through Brother Santiago Cantera, who headed the monastery for 9 years and was said to be a staunch Francoist, and has been replaced by a more moderate Alfredo Moroto, who has committed to keeping the basilica, quote, a monument to reconciliation in a valley of peace. Also, the 500-foot cross, the largest in the world, will not be removed. Praise be to God. Wonderful. Considering the left had vowed to try to remove the cross and the monks from the valley, the church seems to have a good reason to be pleased with the result of the negotiations. I guess you can be pleased that it wasn't so bad, but at the same time, we don't want to be complacent, because the left, all they're going to do is say, okay, we lost. Oh, darn. And then 5-10 years later, they're going to bring up the whole situation, and they might gain another inch or two. And they're going to be like, oh darn, we lost. Oh, got us. And then 5 or 10 years later, they're going to do again, and they're going to take a couple more inches, a few more inches, and again and again and again, until they finally get what they want. That's how it always happens. That's why you can't give these people an inch. Javier Vielmor, I don't know Spanish, whose organization campaigned against the secularization of the site, described this as a, quote, a significant victory for the Catholic Church and citizens who defend religious freedom and respect for Christian identity of Spain, but warns that, quote, we know we will have to keep fighting because the left will not stop at this. Fair. I mean, that's true. I was about to say this is what I'm talking about, but then he immediately says we have to be vigilant because they're going to continue. So, true. The plans for the reconfiguration of the valley continue, Villamor said. The longest basilica in the world will be reduced to about 10 meters, and the entrance will be turned into a museum of revision of recent history. And let's not forget that the basilica is also in the shape of a cross. As they dare not demolish the elevated cross, they will go for the cross that draws the basilica. Amen. This is so eloquent. I love this. I wonder, was this said in English or was this said in Spanish and translated? Because this is beautiful, the way this is put. Others, on the other hand, say that those who see this as a victory are missing the larger picture. Well, that's what I would say, but I think he kind of says that. It says here, quote, "In general, I would say engaging in these conversations with the government is already a loss, and the government is using the church to legitimize its plans. As a Catholic, I'm happy the Basilica and the monks will remain, but it's amazing how we can be in a position where we believe that avoiding the destruction of the cross is a win," said De La Peña. So true. I agree with both of these people. I agree. The mere fact that a government is trying to destroy one of the largest crosses in the world should be of great concern, even if they don't manage to do so yet. Governments should focus on protecting religious freedom, and we should not underestimate the threats to religious liberties that these conversations represent. As the government prepares to receive proposals for its desired re-signification, the Spanish bishops have tried to rein in expectations, reminding everyone that, quote, "It was established that a person proposed by the Catholic Church will review the final winning project of the competition before its execution to ensure that the agreements are respected and the interventions are in accordance with the liturgical norms." Quid pro quo. Who stands to benefit? Around the same time that the government and the church announced that they had reached a deal about the future of the valley, the government also said it had decided not to create a commission to look into sexual abuse in the Catholic Church in Spain. The coincidence led some to claim that the deal between Cobo and the government had been about more than just the valley. The church, however, has strenuously denied that. One Spanish priest who spoke to the pillar, but asked not to be named because this is a sensitive issue, called the theory garbage. The valley mostly belongs to the state. They could basically have done whatever they wanted to it. Yet the church managed to get almost everything it wanted, saving the cross, the monastery, and the basilica. It makes no sense to say that in exchange for this, the government decided not to go ahead with the Commission on Abuse, because the church didn't really make any concessions. Rather, the priest suggested, the government's decision is related to the fact that the church had accepted the official involvement of the People's Defender, an ombudsman charged with protecting fundamental rights and civil liberties in the kingdom, and the bishop's own commission created to evaluate abuse cases and decide on financial compensation for victims. Okay, thus ends the story. That's a long one. Let me switch back. So that's going to conclude our stories for today. It was a kind of a long live stream. It went way longer than I expected. It was only 4 stories, and we streamed for an hour and a half. But that'll conclude for today. We'll close out in a prayer really quick. Always leave comments. Let me know if any future stories that you would like covered, and I'd be happy to cover them and talk about them. Whatever you think is interesting. Let's see. And X, it says, Felix J says, if you haven't already, check Zoomer Historian's video on the Spanish Civil War. Zero questions that no Catholic can support the Republic, but Franco was a little too lenient that the cultural institutions were infiltrated after his death. They all went full mask off. One Catalan priest who was martyred by commies warned of resentment if the church only used Castilian in the catechism. Franco sadly suppressed local languages and cultures that weren't Castilian, and Catalonia is now the least religious region in Spain. Interesting. Thank you for that. And I have not seen Zoomer Historian's video on the Spanish Civil War. I'll have to look that up and watch it. So thanks for the recommendation. Anybody has any recommendations on the Spanish Civil War? This is a topic that I find very fascinating. I just don't know very much about. It's such an anomaly in history. A Simple Crusader said, enjoy the show tonight. God bless. God bless you as well. Let me know what topics you like covered for the future, and I would love to cover those for you. Tomorrow, I think we may do some more cultural things and maybe some reaction. We'll play some Instagram reels or YouTube videos and talk about them, watch them together, maybe make it a little chiller of a day. But let me know what you think. God bless you. God love you. Let's pray. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us. All you martyrs of the Spanish Civil War, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Let me check. There's a comment real quick. Saint Teresa of Avila said, I'm too late for the Louvre. You made it for the end. It's not over yet. Papa Rex says, have you been to Rome, to the Vatican? I have been to the Rome and to the Vatican. My brother and I took a pilgrimage there in January, actually. So that was our first time. Think of something cooler said, do they not have freedom of religion in Spain? It seems that they have some form of religious freedom, probably something that came during the Republican era. The democracy era after the Spanish Civil War, after Franco handed over the regime. But I'm not sure. It would seem that they no longer have it in the UK. I don't know if they ever had it there. It's concerning that it's considered a win just to save the cross. Yeah, agreed. I think we're definitely going to talk about those stories in the UK more because those directly affect us, I think, as well. Let's see. God bless at ASC. God bless. It was very good. I learned a lot. Praise be to God. I'm glad to hear it. Teacher always said Spain is great to visit. I've been once. I'd love to go back. I'd love to go back and spend more time there. Nick says Ave Maria. All right, guys. God bless you. God love you. Come back tomorrow. Make sure you hit the notification bell because I basically choose when I'm going to stream depending on how the day is going and whether or not I'm going to have time earlier or later. So just hit the notification bell, like, subscribe, all that jazz. God bless you. God love you. And we'll see you back really soon.